presentation.
Hi, good morning. Thank you so much for having us. We're bringing you today a case study. Last June of 2020, a group of us from all over the world, actually we have people from the East Coast, West Coast, Midwest, UK, Japan, got together to try to read Finnegans Wake, James Joyce Finnegans Wake, probably one of the most difficult books to read, right? And we create a very interesting group. We met for almost 10 months. And during that process, it was a very democratic process in terms of how we were developing the progression on the reading and the research. And also we were very free in terms of our research agenda and what we could pursue in terms, and as a result, many of our colleagues in our group came up with very innovative approaches to use of online applications that were interactive and I hope you will find very interesting. The first one I wanted to talk to you about is actually Perusal, which was our home-based application. This allows us to share primary and secondary literature on Finnegans Wake. And what is really interesting about this tool is that we can comment on the text on detail, as you see here. If we go into one of the comments, it allows you to comment not only with text, but with graphics, with hyperlinks. And it's a great resource to create asynchronous readings, but then we use it on a synchronous way to really go through our common readings. With this being a particularly difficult literature text, I think the alone time became more communal because we were able to be reading during the week and seeing each other's comments as we were going through these different texts and helping each other decipher whatever can be deciphered from this book, right? This is actually a conversation that Arthur, that you're going to meet in a minute, you can see one of the reactions to one of his glosses. Let me see what else I can show you here. Maybe we can come back later in the conclusions to some of the things that we learned for perusal. And I'm gonna give Julie Boldt now and Renee Wehrle are gonna share with us some other applications they use.
Thanks, Emilio. As a hyperbolized textual puzzle, the Wake seems to prompt its readers to find alternative modes of reading and communication. One of the leading Wakean scholars, David Heyman, notes, the difficulty of absorbing Finnegans Wake results not merely from the highly fragmented nature of its text, also from the fragmented nature of the absorption process itself. In reading Finnegans Wake, one makes a succession of isolated discoveries pertaining to various disciplines. Stationed randomly throughout the volume. Appearing in no special order, they are soon forgotten unless some form of cataloging is attempted. My Miro charts here approach cataloging in the form of mapping, following the specific role of a specific trio through a series of lenses or perspectives. So my first chart here, it operates as a bird's eye view. It focuses solely on the names and their permeations throughout the entire book. This chart explores select passages' genetics and how draft analysis fortifies linkages between their appearances. This frame, I'd like to point out, was created in mind of the potentiality of being a tool for others. Readers of the Wake must frequently oscillate between the original text, secondary sources that gloss or summarize the text, and the page's draft genetics. In order to enable a more simultaneous and collaborative reading, I've assembled all of that within the same chart. We have the original text in the middle and then the gloss branching off on both sides. My last two charts employ a more microscopic inspection, deep diving into specific pages of drafts and utilizing Joyce's notes, development of his Sigla formulae, and his preliminary sketches. Outside of specialized Wakean knowledge, the interdisciplinary point I'd like to make here is that visual and enabling software allow us to
Julie, you got muted.
Oh, yeah.
Hello?
Oh, there we go. Okay. Okay, I'm just going to start from the conclusion. Outside of specialized Wakean knowledge, the interdisciplinary point I'd like to make here is that the visual and enabling software allow us to distill and communicate a great deal of complexity while also embodying interconnectivity in its form. Without coding experience or background knowledge, the visual textual format allows one to interlace multiple perspectives onto the same topic, and via the visual, introduce a larger degree of reader-viewer interactivity. And now I'm going to pass it on to Renee Wehrle.
Sure. Another software for visual mapping that our group studied is Creately. I used Creately to generate flowcharts of textual interpretation processes related to material signification on the one hand and auditory translation on the other. As shown in this flowchart here, visually tracking my own interpretive processes highlights the kinds of interventions in the text that I made in the act of interpreting it. Visually mapping these choices makes possible higher degrees of readerly collaboration, as Julia has already highlighted. I also incorporated Twine, a software designed to create nonlinear text-based stories and games to analyze the complex syntax of a sentence on page 109 and parts of chapter 1.8 of The Wake. Using Twine in a classroom is helpful for integrating an object-oriented, program-based understanding of narrative into humanities classrooms. In order to produce a Twine game, students must be able to translate their own understandings of plot and narrative into two other languages. The first is code. This is an example of upper order critical thinking as it encourages students to synthesize their understanding of textual complexity into straightforward functions for interpretation via code. The second on this slide is visual language. Using Twine allows students to transfer their own mental maps of a text or a sentence onto an object-oriented graphical interface. Doing so advances the literary critical argument that the act of parsing syntactic ambiguity in a text places readers within a mode of reading that is game-like and algorithmic. It forces readers to roll the dice, so to speak, on forms of ambiguity by foregrounding the choice processes that textual interpretation produces. In other words, such software can be deployed to map the kinds of cognitive choices that readers make while reading a complex text. In this way, gamifying the Wake with a software platform complicates the formalist structure of narrative and plot to include other dimensions of chance or readerly agency. And this not only engages students more fully in the process of textual excavation, but also opens new possibilities for meaning production by placing student choices about the act of parsing a text at the forefront of classroom conversation about a work. With such a student-directed approach, we can better facilitate democratic classroom pedagogy than we could with using other teaching methods. So now I'll pass this to Arthur Kolat, who will talk about GSuite.
Hi, thank you very much. I will talk about GSuite here. Excuse me. The philosopher Bruno Latour posits the idea that bureaucrats possess power derived from processes of correlating and juxtaposing files, or paper shuffling, as he puts it. Latour says, quote, "Domains which are far apart become literally inches apart. Domains which are convoluted and hidden become flat. Thousands of occurrences can be looked at synoptically." A similar operation, it seems to me, is possible digitally via the tools in Google's GSuite, a widely used software package which allows an array of files to be shuffled, image, text, and audio alike, across a variety of formats: spreadsheet, slideshow, document, and video. My work focused on pages 119 to 124 of Joyce's Finnegans Wake, and I used mainly Google Docs, Google Sheets, and Google Slides to shuffle digital files into a dense network of hyperlinked reference texts and images. This multi-channel synergistic network of materials enabled textual and visual information to be coordinated and marshaled towards analytical and interpretive ends. Arranging these materials into a kind of hyperlinked intranet allowed possible meanings to resonate in new constellations. So by cutting and pasting and hyperlinking files, I created a digital bureau or repository which brought together far-flung, convoluted, and hidden domains, and then flattened this famously inscrutable book for my synoptic consideration. Digital paper shuffling afforded me the power to parse, which I then used to interpret the text in original, convincing, and sometimes eccentric ways. My spreadsheet lines up from left to right parts of Finnegans Wake, Edward Sullivan's early 20th century introduction to the Book of Kells, the Book of Kells itself, and the Buffalo Notebook entries of notebook 6.b.6, which records the notes that Joyce took while he was working on Finnegans Wake. From top to bottom, the spreadsheet runs from page 107 to 124 and tries to cover the chapter's references to Sullivan/Kells. This led to using Google Slides to illustrate bits of Finnegans Wake text with Book of Kells imagery and scholarship, informed, of course, by the notes that Joyce took while he was reading Sullivan's introduction. Once those slides were finished, I put links to them in the relevant sections in the spreadsheet. I then delivered the slideshows in Zoom, recorded them, and posted my illustrated oral readings on YouTube. Because of its pervasiveness, Google Drive may have a relatively low barrier to entry for many students, while also allowing them to put an enormous amount of organized information at their fingertips. This empowers them to as finders and producers of knowledge. Preparing materials in Google Drive also had the benefit of asynchronous presentation, something we know a lot about at this point, which is just to say that students can use non-class time to make or review presentations and lectures, and that leaves class time for discussion or other activity, other engagement. Yeah, and finally, I will say, our group used a Google Doc with hyperlinks as the archive for our various projects. You can see my contributions to our group on screen, and this link to the Google Doc will now allow us to easily share what knowledge we did produce with those who might find it interesting. So now I will pass it back to Emilio Williams.
Yeah, I'm finishing up very quick. I wanted to show a fun use of Google Earth here to do a biographical analysis of the time of the writing by James Joyce of Finnegans Wake. So of course, this is not a substitution for a field trip or a summer class in Paris, but it was a constellation of shorts. And I think what is interesting about this process is the idea of utilizing locations from Google Earth to tell a biographical story or the story of a process, where you can add photograph and text in the different addresses, and you can have geographical correlations for a biography or a history. With that, I wanted to close up with some conclusions. The first one, I think for me, first I want to thank to our organizer of this reading group, James Elkins, who is a professor at the School of the Art Institute, who was the organizer of these sessions, and I forgot to mention that at the beginning. But in terms of conclusions, I think having a learning management system of file sharing app like we had in Perusal really helped coordinate and bring together the asynchronous and the synchronous, and I think that was very valuable for our group.
Yes, absolutely. And Perusal, it's an interesting program, allows the sort of personal, isolated reading experience to become communal and conversational and to be collaboratively building.